Hi, guys. Um, so this is our Wednesday lecture. And today in this part of the lecture, I'm going to focus on two things. But before I get to that, um, by the way, I had moved your second reflection paper back, and it's due today. And your third reflection paper will be due next week. So keep that in mind. Also, some of you have clearly not watched the lecture because you haven't responded to the discussion question that was posed in the first part of the lecture. So I would encourage you to keep up with your work. I tried to slow down with the amount a little bit last week, so please do keep up with that. Now, in 2 weeks, on October 21st, your final paper topic is due. Um, so this is, you need to, in 2 weeks, the October 21st, you need to tell me exactly what you intend to do your final paper on, what subject. Um, Now, you're, if you say, for example, free speech, you'll see today that I'm going to include a number of things under free speech. If you tell me slavery, there are a number of things that could be included in slavery, like monuments to slaveholders, slavery in other parts of the world, that it's a broad topic. Now you can narrow it down, and that's perfectly fine. But when you're doing your reflection papers, I expect you to be able to tell me kind of all the nuances as you would understand them about the topic. But then for your final paper to narrow it down to exactly what it is you want to what it is you want to argue, and how that is a moral and social issue. Uh, I put it in shorthand. How is it an ethical problem? How is it a moral problem? Um, so um, I've given you written instructions on how to do an annotated bibliography. So let me just encourage you to be working on that right now, because that is your first big project that's due. And if you look at the total point value for that, you will see that it is definitely the largest point value of anything you will have had to date. So the way that you do that is you find a source that you want to use, something that you think will be helpful in your final paper. Once you've identified that source, that online source, remember it needs to be a .org, .gov, .edu. You really don't want a lot of .nets or .coms. Once you have sufficient number of .org, .edu, .gov, then you can add in .coms, .nets, or any of the other URLs like that. But to begin with, please do most of your sources from those sources, your sources that you hope to use from .org, .gov, and .edu. And after you have maybe 10 of those, then you can begin to branch out into .com and .net sources. But I want you to primarily look at those. So what I would encourage you to do is you find something that you want to use in your final paper. All right, you've got your topic, you know what you want to talk about. So the way it starts is copy that URL, cut, paste it into a Word document, that URL. Just cut it, copy it, and paste it into a Word document. Then just take 5 minutes. Really, guys, this is all it takes, each one of them, 5 minutes. What did you see in that source? What did you see in that source that you thought would help you write your final paper? So explain it in a line or two, and even I would say include a quote from that source, so that as I look at your annotated bibliography, I can see exactly why you want to use that source, and I can find that quote as well if I'm looking for it. And then the way I encourage my students to do this, and you listen to me, it'll be really easy, is every night as you're going to bed, think about your paper topic. Okay, I'm going to write on X. Okay, let me just look for another source tonight, .org, .edu, .gov source that talks about this. All right, here's one. All right, make that your bedtime reading, one time a week. And find that, copy it, read that article. Yes, this will help me. Even if you say it doesn't help me, that's still a source. That's still a source. So you can still use that in your annotated bibliography. You do not have to use everything in your annotated bibliography in your final paper. Okay? So if a source helps you rule out, or if you rule out a source, it's still something that you consulted in preparation for your final paper. So by all means, you can use that. So I hope that helps you begin to think about your annotated bibliography. Okay, sorry, I had to pause for a moment. I had to attend to something else. So now I want to begin to talk about two topics that I think will interest you a little bit. And then I'm going to, so this is going to be a two-part lecture. I'll keep this part relatively short, and then get into another part as well. So I want to talk about the issue of guns. Broad topic, my last name. But here, I thought it would be helpful if I just put up for you, because in the United States, very often when we talk about guns, we discuss them within the context of the Second Amendment. Now, let me remind you a little bit about the Second Amendment to the Constitution. The Second Amendment was part of the Bill of Rights that was passed by part of the Bill of Rights that were amended to the US Constitution and ratified on December 15th, 1791. So the Second Amendment, just like First Amendment and all 10, were not part of the Constitution originally. So if someone asks you, is the Bill of Rights in the Constitution? Excuse me, the answer is no. It is an amendment to the Constitution. An amendment is a way that the Constitution is changed. I hope you've had a civics lesson, government lesson, and you know all this. So it was not in the original document, although the Bill of Rights, which are these first 10 amendments, were passed all at once. Now, the first one, the First Amendment, guaranteed freedom of speech, press, and assembly, and religion, or from religion, if as you might want to put it. The Second Amendment had to do with guns, but it doesn't actually say guns. let me, oh goodness, here I'm having trouble with this. So let me share the Second Amendment with you so you can see it. Uh, Here we go. Share screen. First time I'm doing this so that I can actually record something that I'm sharing. The Second Amendment says this. Again, remember this was ratified December 15th, 1791. This is the full text of it, okay? Not trying to trick you. It's full text of it. A well-regulated, and I noticed that my my grammar check picks it up, and that should be hyphenated. I'm not sure it is in the original text, but it says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, if you notice that, and if you parse this sentence very carefully, and people have done this for 240 years, they've parsed, 230 years, they've parsed this sentence to try to figure out exactly what it was that the writer of this amendment was talking about. Okay, a well-regulated militia. Now, what does militia mean then, and what does it mean now? Being necessary to the security of a free state. Okay. The right of the people to keep and bear arms. Again, not guns, arms. We know that that's generally what it means, shall not be infringed. But let's talk about some aspects of this. First of all, militia. When this was written, the militia was basically what we call today the state guard, the National Guard. Each state today has a guard unit that is particular to each state. Of course, we know that there are different parts of it, but the militia is the National Guard that is in each state. Now, in the event, and the governor of the state has control over those National Guard troops within his or her state. And so if there is a natural disaster, if there is a crisis of some type on the streets or otherwise, a governor can mobilize the National Guard within his state or her state. So that is how the term militia has been interpreted constitutionally to this day. It does not then make provision for a private militia. Let's get that straight. It doesn't make provision for a private militia where guys order their own weapons or get their own weapons and go out and practice routines in the woods or in the fields. That's not what it's talking about. Now, can people who own guns get together and go out and run drills in the woods or in the fields? Yes, they can do that. They can have a gun party. But that is not what a militia was actually talking about, and as it has come down to us today. So a well-regulated militia, they acknowledge it is necessary for the security of a free state. So to keep us free. Now here, state does not mean the state of New Jersey per se. And let me back up and say this about the National Guard. The National Guard in each state can be federalized. So the federal government may call up, in fact, you might know in times of war, Many of our National Guard troops, in fact, this was a huge problem during the Afghanistan and Iraq wars, that many National Guard units were sent for long deployments overseas, or sometimes used to backfill positions for regular military who were overseas. So in other words, to fill the stateside or other posts and positions. But here, let me go on. So they recognize that it is necessary for the security of a free state. So a well-regulated National Guard is necessary for the security of a free country. Here the word state is interpreted to mean country, not one of the individual states, as in New Jersey, New Hampshire, Texas, California. So that is kind of one thought. Second thought, the right of the people to keep and bear arms. Remember that when the militias, which became the National Guards, were organized originally, you would not be issued a weapon. You might eventually, but remember when this country was founded, it depended on many frontiersmen bringing their own muskets to the battle. They had worked with these muskets, they knew these muskets, they had killed bear and deer and other sorts of animals with these muskets. They had protected their homes perhaps with these muskets. So because they were trusted to them, they were able to keep them and use them when they were called upon to defend our liberty in the American Revolution. As the army became regular and organized, weapons were issued. But it still says that the people can bear arms, keep and bear them. So you can not only keep them, but you can have them. Shall not be infringed. Shall not be infringed. Now, what is that applying to? A well-regulated militia shall not be infringed. The right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. What exactly does shall not be infringed apply to here? What part of that amendment, what part of that statement does this phrase really apply to? This has been, as I said, a source of debate for nearly 230 years now. And there is no broad consensus on this. Although many people who oppose guns in some form will very often say, all right, fine, the government allows you to keep arms, but maybe that was muskets. Whereas other people believe that anything that you can shoot, you should have. But it's important to remember that the government has infringed. Right, I'm going to stop this share now. It's important to remember that the government has infringed upon your right to bear some types of arms. For example, generally speaking, you can't have a machine gun. Oh, it's getting dark. Generally speaking, you can't have a machine gun. That is a fully automatic machine gun. Generally speaking, you can't have a howitzer. You can't drive a tank. You can have maybe a decommissioned cannon of some type from the Civil War, War of 1812, the 1900s, early 1900s. But generally, you can't have a functional cannon as we know them in the military today. And there are other things that you're not allowed to have. So the government has already infringed on some rights to bear some weapons. So generally, the argument then comes down to, given that people, maybe it's a broad agreement that people can keep weapons of some type, guns of some type. What types of guns should people be allowed to have? Now, in the early 90s, there was an assault weapons ban that was passed under Bill Clinton, bipartisan support, Republicans and Democrats. That expired in 2002, I think it was. It was for 10 years. Crime dropped precipitously, especially violent crime with weapons dropped precipitously during that time. You can look up the statistics on this. I'm not just making it up. So then some people will argue, well, assault weapons should be banned. But given that there are so many assault weapons, in fact, a recent article from the New York Times says that there are around 15 million military-style rifles in civilian hands today. So are we really going to confiscate all those weapons from those folks? It would be a near impossible task to do that. It would be nearly impossible. So is there a way to regulate then those weapons? And some have said that we should renew the assault weapons bans. Others have said, well, maybe we should limit the magazine capacity. Magazine capacity means the number of bullets that that gun can shoot, or the speed with, or maybe limit the speed with which those guns can shoot, or limit devices that make a semi-automatic weapon virtually automatic. And so these type of things have been proposed, and some of them have been passed. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to post some articles for you to look at and read about this. They come from both sides. So it's 2 articles pro and 2 articles against. So I'm going to post those articles, and I'm going to post you some videos for you to watch on this topic as well. But then there's a second part to this that I'd like to go into today, and that has to do with free speech, which is in the First Amendment. Give me just a moment. I'll pull up the First Amendment for you. Okay, so here we go. Here is the First Amendment to the Constitution. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Now, this one seems to be a little bit more clear, doesn't it, than the Second Amendment. But hold on just a second. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. So does that mean that then that we're not a Christian nation? Maybe. You might have heard that we are. But Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. However, we know that into the 1800s, there actually were state churches in some, and that is state sanctioned churches in some states, and tax dollars did go to support that. There are tax dollars that go to support certain religious buildings at times, like for historic restoration and things like that. Now, it has to be very narrowly defined and very narrowly applied. Again, it's usually for like historic preservation, but that money is there. But let me throw you for a loop. The United States Senate and the United States House each have on payroll a chaplain. And in both cases, they are Christian, not Jewish, not Muslim, not Buddhist. And your tax dollars pay for that. Is that right or wrong? Is that establishment of religion? And before the US Senate begins its session, before the US House of Representatives begins its session, they always pray. In fact, it's not unusual before any government function, any public government activity, for them to invite a chaplain, either on staff, not on staff, military, non-military, guest, to come and give an invocation, to invoke the presence of God into that procedure, that gathering. So it's not unusual at all. So is that the establishment of religion? Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof? So that means the government cannot do anything to prohibit you exercising your religion. However, we know that the government has. There have been times when the government, for example, restricted Native Americans' activities because they thought that they were pagan of some type. We know that the government has stepped in at times and said to parents who would rather not give their child, for example, a vaccine, and said, okay, fine, don't give a vaccine, but you can't send your child to public school. We know that these sorts of things have happened. For example, what about if your religion is to drink a little wine on Sunday? Yeah, okay, we see that. But what about if it's to smoke marijuana? Nope, can't do that. Magic mushrooms? Nope, sorry, your religion, that's not a valid religion. So the government then is prohibiting the free exercise of religion in some situations. And what about the freedom of speech? It is a given, for example, that you cannot shout fire in a crowded theater. So there are some forms. You also can't say just anything you want about a person. It's called libel, and you can be sued for that. So there are some forms of speech that can be prohibited within a public college or within a not a public college, but a public high school, for example. There are certain things that you cannot say. Now, I want to come back to that in just a moment. And freedom of the press or assembly. But let's come back to this free speech. Since we've been talking about issues of race, what about the N-word? Now, the government doesn't prohibit that. But as a free person, shouldn't I be allowed to use every word that's within my vocabulary? Why or why not? And then when it comes to other types of speech, now let's consider this for a moment. What about Confederate monuments? Isn't that a form of speech? Wouldn't that be a type of speech? What about someone like Milo Yiannopoulos? I'm going to share a video about Milo Yiannopoulos in a moment. What about buildings named after slaveholders or monuments to slaveholders? Aren't those a type of speech? Should the government be in the business of censoring those? So when we talk about free speech, we're talking about a lot. And then, or of the press, the freedom of the press. What about when the President of the United States refers to the press as the enemy of the people? What about assembly? Maybe you participated in a Black Lives Matter march this summer. Are there situations where it is justified for the government to say that you cannot assemble? These are questions that we should consider when we're talking about these issues, because they are questions about liberty and what is just and right for us to do or not do. Now, it's at this point that I'm going to go ahead and stop this part of the video, and then there will be a second part that I will post a little bit later. Thanks, guys.